everyone. In today's episode, we'll be talking with an education leader from Kenwood Elementary School in Louisville, Kentucky. They will share with us their experience with Solution Tree, the impact of professional development, particularly with the professional learning community process, and then also sharing effective strategies and practices specific to their experience and their success story in becoming a Model PLC school. With us today from Kenwood Elementary School, Principal Jill Handley, joined by our very own Solution Tree Associate, Mona Toncheff. Thank you for joining me for this episode.
Thank you for having us.
Now, I did want to ask you, Ms. Mona, can you give us an overview before we get started into the success story for today, an overview of what Mathematics at Work is and how it has its relevance to PLC?
Absolutely. So Mathematics at Work is built upon the foundational belief that every pre-K-12 student can learn mathematics. And so Mathematics at Work is the framework that's built upon the foundation of the 4 critical questions, right? The critical question 1, what do we want our students to know and be able to do? Critical question 2, how will we know when they have learned the content and the processes we want in terms of the mathematical thinking? Critical question 3 and 4 are around what's that collective response? What's that team response going to be for students that have learned the content and the students that still need additional time and support? So the Math at Work teaches the team actions needed to be an effective mathematics professional learning community and grows the collective teacher efficacy by examining the assessments, the instruction, the intervention, the homework, the grading, the data analysis, and the team foundations as part of the learning cycle for each unit. Teachers answer the 4 critical questions and grow their practices specific to mathematics.
There's so much to it. Especially because mathematics is a very particular, specific topic. But then, yes, it's a lot. So can you both share with us just your experience with Mathematics at Work professional development?
Sure, I'll start. So we at Kenwood, I think, Mona, was it 10 years ago? About 10 years ago, we at Kenwood, our district, had the opportunity to apply to be a pilot school. We were choosing. Our district was a pretty large district. We have 167 schools throughout the district, and they were choosing 13 schools to pilot and work with Solution Tree. Alongside with Rick and Becky DeFore during that time to start this whole, what they were calling PLC process. And I say what they were calling it because at that time, it really was kind of an unheard of sort of a situation. And so listening to, so at that time, what happened is that our district had the opportunity to send leadership teams of, I think, 3 or 4 people to a mini conference to hear more about it, to kind of incite some excitement or to see if you were really interested. So I took a small team with us, and everything that I was listening to, and I was reading success stories at that time and seeing that the gains that other schools were making as a result of the work with Solution Tree. And so, of course, as a leader, and at that time I was fairly new leader. I was only 5 years into my tenure as a principal. Anything that was going to help test scores increase, of course, at that time, I was buying everything they were selling. And so we applied at that point. There were conditions that needed to be met. And so at that time, we applied. Thankfully, were chosen to be part of the pilot. And that's where we signed on with Solution Tree with our initial endeavor.
Yes, and I was the PLC coach that was assigned. I worked with 2 schools over a 3-year time period. And I remember going in the first couple of visits, and really the teacher teams had limited experience with math content, right? They typically, as an elementary school teacher, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Jill, they might take a couple math methods courses, but that is really their experience. So whatever they experienced in their K-12 learning, and then some of the math methods. Mm-hmm. So just digging deep into the content and having students develop number sense was a new arena for a lot of the teachers. So not only did we work on how do you build a professional learning community, but you are also focusing on how do you build content knowledge.
Yes.
Well, thank you for letting me know more about just your experience there. And I know we're going to get more into it, absolutely, because I'm really excited to see just the interaction that you both had with each other and just like with the overall experience of being part of it. So, Principal Handley, as a principal for 15 years, as you mentioned, I believe,
Yes.
15 still, tell us more about Kenwood Elementary School, just about the teachers, students, school culture.
Absolutely. Well, again, as you mentioned, I am the very proud principal of Kenwood Elementary, located in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm finishing year 15. It's hard to believe time has gone that quickly, but we have a beautifully diverse population. We service anywhere between 575 to 600 kiddos, K through 5. Our school usually teeters between 85 and 90% free and reduced or at-risk population. We have a very large multilingual learner population. About 44% of our population is multilingual learners, and coming to us from over 25 different countries, speaking over 25 different languages. So that's the student body piece. The teacher, we one of the things that we really pride ourselves on is just the culture that we have, because I think as leaders, that's where you have to start. If you don't have a great culture, nothing else matters. And so I like to say that you come in and we're proud of a lot of things that we do, but our culture is one of the things that we pride ourselves on the most. And so as a result of that, we don't have a tremendous amount of teacher turnover. So many of the teachers have been here for a long time. I would say that, gosh, probably 65% of the teachers that trained with Mona 10 years ago are still here. And so that's really exciting news. And so we in addition to being a success story with Solution Tree, we were recently recognized as a National Distinguished ESEA school as a result of the work that we do with our multilingual learners. And then a few years ago, we were recognized as a state and national school of character. And so that we were the only school in the state of Kentucky to have ever been recognized as a national school of character. So really excited about that. We're the only school in our district to have received the national recognition for ESEA school, formerly known as Title I. So just a lot of great things. We just really believe in educating the whole child. And so our collective commitments are really geared toward that.
Oh, well, congratulations. That's like huge.
Thank you.
Just to be recognized just on a very higher, like bigger scale, for people to kind of see you as a leading school, and then also to see your leadership, to see your like dynamic of, because it's not just you, it's not just a one teacher, it's everybody, like you mentioned, that everybody's working together to create this great environment for our students, for your students.
It really is. So the culture piece, I think, is instrumental. But I think, from the perspective of sense of belonging, of course, that's one of the things that we hang our hats on. But as far as the collaborative work for academic achievement, we wouldn't have made the gains that we made had it not have been with our collaboration with Solution Tree, with the PLC work, and then mathematics work that we've done with Mona. So that is definitely an integral part of our success.
So tell us about what inspired the school's decision to participate as its pilot professional learning communities. I know you did mention that it was because of the opportunity, but then also when a previous conversation that we had, you did talk about like your lows and your highs of what was going on prior.
Absolutely. So at the time when this opportunity presented itself, our state accountability testing system had just changed over. And so we had just gotten our test scores. And so the thing about it is that as a teacher, prior to being a principal, I was a teacher and of course an instructional coach. And I felt like instruction was something that I was very strong at. And so coming into being a principal and then having test scores, the first year of the new accountability system, we had the lowest math proficiency of 92 elementary schools, right? That was, here's the thing, that was a real blow to my ego, to be honest with you, as a leader, because all I could think was, what is going on here? I know instruction. I know instruction. I was a great teacher. In fact, I was a great fifth grade math teacher. My own test scores were great. I coached teachers. They were great. So what is going on here? And so at this time, clearly I was very, very hungry to look for something that was going to make an impact. And as I mentioned, when we went to the kind of the mini session and me reading about the other success stories, I thought, okay, this sounds, and there were tenets around it, common planning time and things like that. And I felt like we were really at the point to where, one, we had to do something, but two, just seeing the success success that other schools had. It wasn't like a silver bullet. It really was investing in like your systems and structures. And so that's what was really appealing to me, because I am a believer in, you have to create firm foundations of systems and structures that are sustainable. Otherwise, you're just going to be recreating the wheel every year. So the fact that we needed to do something, and this really spoke to kind of like long-term changes versus an overnight success, even though we did kind of experience what I consider to be a lot of overnight success. I say overnight, but over 3 years, but it felt very affirming to us. But it just everything, and then the passion with which Rick and Becky DeFore spoke about the power of PLCs, it just really spoke to who I am as an educator, as a leader. And so I was like, okay, we've got to at least look into this.
Right. And just the dynamic of being the opportunity also to be under their supervision and under their just direction. I can't even imagine. Oh, just that alone. Like, what was that like for both of you?
It was pretty awesome. I got to work directly with Becky, and I learned a ton about how to really support building the professional learning community process at an elementary level. So my background is high school. So it was just a really great opportunity for both me, and I know Jill and her staff. We learned together. It wasn't about me having all the answers. It was about us working collectively to figure out how to best support the students.
Well, and the thing about it is that education, I mean, particularly at the elementary level, I mean, our teachers are generalists, right? So they're supposed to be good at everything, with only a few methods courses and things like, you may have 1 or 2 math courses, 1 or 2 ELA courses, yet you're supposed to come out masterful at all of these things. In addition to that, teaching is often delivered in kind of a silo, let me shut my door and do my thing. And so as a teacher, I was fortunate enough to work with teams to where I understood the power of collective efficacy, right? And so if this was an avenue to be able to implement this at the school level, and we were already having some conditions that allowed that opportunity to come to us, then yes, it was definitely sign us up. But with Rick and Becky, it was a little bit like Rockstar. I was fangirling, like we would Skype with them. At this time, it was Skype, right? And so it was like, oh my gosh, I would get off there, and it was just almost like, oh, I really was just on a call with Rick or Becky, and it was, a little bit of fangirling with that.
But they just appeared because obviously I was not able to meet them, but they just appear the way that you see them in anything that we're able to observe in any video resources. They just appear so approachable and attainable, and they truly had that huge impact of caring of what they were doing, and so passionate, which just really I didn't meet them, but I've met you, and it just really does transition into how you talk, how you portray your passion for education. So I can only imagine meeting them too. All right. So Ms. Toncheff, so with your experience in professional development and an expert in mathematics as an educational presenter and author, then you also did mention that you're a program supervisor for the University of Arizona Teach program. That's a lot going on there. I admire so much. It's just multitasking, but not on a professional scale. I wouldn't even know where to start with this. But what was your initial approach with Kenwood Elementary School, and then how did it unravel during the 3-year journey?
So the first year is about the foundations of collaboration. The one thing that Kenwood, I think Jill mentioned this, like they had some of the structures in place for collaboration. So their teams were already meeting. It was just a matter of what are we working on, right? Like what's the right work of the team? So that first year we really dug into, I just remember like common assessments, like that was like mind blowing when I was talking about you need to have a variety of item types, and they're like, it's not all multiple choice. I'm like, no, like, let's assess mathematical understanding. And that doesn't always happen on a multiple choice item. So we did a lot of work around common assessments. I think we even tackled common scoring, because they might have created common assessments, but they hadn't actually talked about scoring them the same way or providing feedback to students in the same manner. So we dug into that. Then we, as the year progressed, we dug into the data piece, which is where we actually looked at the student work and identified what are the students learning. And then from there, and this is the cycle, right? This goes on every single year. But the cycle was then, as we're looking at the data and what's showing that their students not learning, the question becomes, so then what do we need to do differently? And that's one of the more complex questions to answer as a collaborative team, because if I'm coming into this teaching situation and I only have one way to teach something, and it's not necessarily using manipulatives or models or tape diagrams or anything like that, that's where the content development becomes, because then we start to say, well, let's think about what are some other things that we could do, right? What are other research-based practices or research-affirmed practices that we could do? And that's where you can pull in some of the content knowledge to really get teams to understand, well, what does it mean to be proficient? And that was like our first year was just understanding that process. And then the second and third year was just refinement. Like, okay, so now we've got better common assessments, but now when we actually dig into the standard again and go through that unpacking process, that's not really this is where we thought it was last year, but now we think it's here. So let's look at this assessment and let's make this assessment stronger, or let's talk about our instruction. One of I just popped up on my time hop recently. I don't know if you remember this, Jill, but when I was there for one of my last visits, we did like a abridged lesson study, and I did 6 of them in like 2 days, where I got like 2 hours with the team. So they had all co-planned a lesson. One of the teachers taught it, and then we debriefed afterwards. And I did that with 6 different teams. It was awesome. Like, what a great learning experience to listen to students, to see how they're engaging in the content based on how the teacher team designed the specific lesson elements. So that was, it was a lot. I was only there 8 days during the school year. But the best part of it was when I worked with Kenwood, like I would leave them with something to do, to practice or to reinforce between that visit and the next one. And I would come back and they did it. And they had questions and they wanted to learn more. So I work with schools all over the place. And I will tell you, what makes it sustainable is the commitment of the teams to keep going. That Kenwood has that heart. When she talks about the culture and all those pieces, her teams care about kids, and they believe all students can learn. And they realized when I was there that they could do more to make that belief come true.
Wow. But did you see just your own experience, like your own as a person who's kind of instructing this process and this journey? Did you see any growth yourself on your own way of doing things, of approaching helping schools and such?
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, I sat beside them and worked with them and learned. I don't know if Jill knows this, but that was the first year when I worked at her school, I was working with a K-5 team. I had done a ton of work with middle school and high school, but that was my kind of real learning of some of the K-5 content, because that's not something they teach secondary teachers. So we were learning together. I was calling my counterparts at the other schools going, okay, so they're struggling with this. What's a good model or strategy? Because like I said, I know my content, I'm better now. I am always willing to learn more. And so when we ask the right questions, we dig deeper, because we don't make decisions as a team based on just our opinion. We make decisions on things outside of us. So outside of our room. So there's we pulled books and resources to teach specific like fractions. I know we pulled in a lot of resources for fractions just to help the team understand, well, what's the best way to support this conceptual idea. So, and at the time when Kenwood really started this process, that was about the time that the Common Core was released. I think it was right after. So a lot of instructional shifts that were occurring in mathematics, that was what we were digging into, which was really, it was like the perfect timing, so to speak, of pulling all these pieces together for the school. Like they could see the connections between the work they did as a team, the work of the mathematics and the instructional shifts, and how that actually employed in the classroom.
Okay. So during this time, Principal Handley, at that time, what were the practices and the school was doing that you wanted to improve first?
Well, it's funny because when you look back now, and what happens is that you kind of forget how you started, right? Once you get things and it becomes part of your normal routine, you kind of think, what was that like? But I think I'm going to kind of jump around your question, but I am going to answer it, is that I remember at the end of year 3, and this is where I'm going to start here, is we had a gallery walk, right? And so what it was teams had the opportunity to put together their rendition of their journey. And it was very open-ended, but I will never forget our 3rd grade team. They kind of did a timeline in which they were putting like what their formative assessments look like, their common assessments look like year 1, year 2, year 3. And so what I will say is the 2 big things that stick out to me have to do with the first one, as Mona talked about, the standards were new, was sitting at the time that we took to deconstruct the standards together. That was huge. And year 1 was a lot of hard work. I'm not going to lie. Like year 1 was probably the most work we've ever put in as a staff. And I say we, because I really love the way that the framework is set up, in the sense that I was learning along with the teachers, right? And so I think that as a leader allows an opportunity to, give you street cred, if you will, because you're in the same boat. It's not, it's brand new. I'm asking the staff to learn something, but I'm being vulnerable to learn it too. 1, because I want to know what it is that they're being expected to do. And 2, I need to understand how I'm supposed to guide that process. But to answer your questions, the things that we're doing. So the understanding that, so that we had a common understanding, because it could have been the 3 of us were all 3rd grade teachers. You interpret the standard one way, I interpret another, Mona interprets another, and then therefore we all go teach it the way we interpreted it. And then when they go to 4th grade, they have 3 different classrooms full of a different understanding. So that was the first step, was really all of us being on the same page with, if this standard says this, what does that mean? So I think that was a very powerful practice, is to all get on the same page. And there were so many, but the 2 things that I think that really elevated things. And the second part was just administering regular, ongoing, common assessments. Because prior to joining on with Solution Tree, our district, they pushed out proficiencies 3 times a year. Okay. And so we gave those. And then, some teachers might have given an end of chapter test from the textbook, if you will. Was it standards based? Who knows? I mean, at the end of the day, it was there, and they gave it, and they got a grade. We knew the haves and the haves nots. So just administering, getting on the same page with understanding what is our common understanding of the standard, and 2, doing that backwards design, with starting with that common summative and then working backward with common formatives, because we were very rigid with our practice of administering a common assessment every 2 weeks, because we wanted to know, when I think that prior to this, we didn't do that, it's like, well, how the heck did we ever know what the kids knew? Because it seems preposterous to think that schools aren't or weren't administering common assessments and on a regular, ongoing basis, right? So those were 2 of the practices I would say that we were not doing, that we started doing, that had the biggest bang for our buck. And so I laugh when I talk about that year 3 celebration. I just remember our 3rd grade team, because they looked back at year 1 common assessments. They were horrible. I mean, they were like, some of them literally were kind of cut and paste from a textbook. Like, oh, this looks like a good question. This looks like a literal cut and paste. And so what I say is that by year 3, we were able to reflect on what poor quality year 1 were. But here's the thing about it. Year 1's poor quality common assessments were better than year 0, because year 0, we didn't have any. And the exciting thing is that after that first year of all of that heavy lifting, because we would spend a whole hour, we would be deconstructing 1, maybe 2 standards. And that's all that they walked away with. And you have to know that teachers, their time is precious. So walking away without a tangible product, that sometimes was a hard sell. I'm not going to lie, sitting down to be committed to, we spent a whole hour and all we did was talk about something. So that could have been the perception, but fortunately for us, just that the work that we did in year one, we doubled our proficiency in 1 year. So I remember when we had the largest jump in proficiency in the entire district. So let me start with, we started with the lowest, and in 1 year we doubled our proficiency and had the highest jump. And I remember getting scores and I was literally crying with my teachers, and they were crying too, because it was like, oh my gosh, you all look, our work, it works. That's all I can remember thinking, and them thinking too, like, oh my gosh, it worked, because it was a lot of hard work. And we know teachers work hard every day, but when they're able to see the fruits of their labor in such a small amount of time and such a mass amount, we were sold. At that point, we're like, okay, and then we just continued to jump, and clearly doubling your proficiency every year is not something that is sustainable. But that definitely was a nice way to say, like, okay, it works. We've just got to continue to refine. And so I will say that everybody was sold after that point of like, okay, yes, we want more of this. How do we continue? And we actually did continue on our trajectory over the time. And it was just every year, like, there's no way we can get a big gain like this, right? We continued like 6-7 point gains in our proficiency, which, that's a lot over a year's time. And so it was just very exciting to see that what we look back now seems like small things. At that time, it felt like big things because we weren't doing any of them, and the success that we were able to garner as a result of it.
Well, I'm sure it's rewarding just to see just the overall growth, but then also that there's a lot of investment from your own teachers, like you said. That's just incredible, and I could see that being kind of like, well, this is the 1 hour we're losing, but did you like look where you are now? And I'm sure, do you ever have conversations with your teachers like, this is how much this has impact our individual person as a professional?
Yeah, they, just that sense of that collective efficacy, I think, is just what was so powerful. Again, if you've never been part of a team to where you understand work smarter, not harder, and that, the collective whole is better than the individual, then people don't always buy into it. And I would say that, and I know this isn't the question, but with barriers, I think sometimes it's people who don't truly understand the impact of collaboration. That's probably one of the biggest obstacles to overcome, is getting people to understand the reason why it's more powerful that we come together as a team versus you do your thing and I'll do my thing.
So, Miss Handley, as your school continues to succeed, seeing results of improvement, as you mentioned, what was the most noticeable feedback from the teachers about working closer as teams?
I think just seeing the success of students and just seeing the impact, like I mentioned, of working together as a team. And I want to kind of go back to something you said, is that I think the reason why this is so powerful is because it's not learning a program, right? It's developing the process to understand how to impact your pedagogy, your approach as a teacher. And so that's why it's so powerful, is that, there are lots of programs out there, and there are copious amounts of professional development that has to go into that, right? To teach that program. And that's why this is different. And I think that some of the feedback is that, let's face it, over time, and I know I've been in our particular district for 25 years, and I've watched lots of programs come and go. And so what happens as an educator, you want your time to feel valued. And so if I've spent 80 hours learning this program, and in 3 years our district is switching to another program, that 80 hours is now gone. This particular process, it's not about programs, it's about process. And I think that's the teachers have always felt that their time was valued because they were never learning something that was going away. Good teaching is never going away. Understanding how to analyze data to impact student achievement and change your own practices, that's never going away. So it's kind of like an investment that keeps on giving. And I think that's one of the selling points, I would say, if schools haven't invested in this, is that, we all hear that like, oh yeah, what's going to come around next, or how long is this going to be around? And truthfully, that was kind of that was initially, before we knew what we were getting into, there was some of that skepticism, because that had been the mantra of the way things had been done was, okay, we've learned this program, how long is it going to be around? But once we got into it, and some of the feedback was really like, okay, this isn't a program. This is something that is teaching me, and I'm walking away with, regardless of where the students come in or how the standards change. This is about good practices that will impact my teaching and ultimately student achievement.
Right. And then also your own growth. I know that the focus is for our students, for your students, but it's also because mathematics isn't just it's not a broad thing. It is so intricate. It has its own layers. It has its own things itself, like the way that you have to teach it, but then also like the wrapping around it of like the professional development component that you have to provide. That's a whole other situation.
Yeah, and the other thing that was great, and I know that I just want to say this, that working with Mona was so great, because as the leader, like, I'm championing a lot of things, but I'm going to go back to when she said she gave us homework, if you will, like I was part of that too. And so that was nice as the leader, because we often get, jaded glasses in our own building, right? We see things because we know we have biases, right? Having an outside consultant who just kind of gives the task, comes back with an objective lens. And, Mona has such a perfect way of pushing us to the edge, but not over, like push everybody out of their comfort zone, because let's face it, we don't grow if we stay comfortable, right? So she does such a masterful job of pushing us just enough to grow, but not over the edge, and in sizable chunks, so that in between times, I think a mistake that so many schools make is they set this long-term goal, right? And they wait till the end of the year to celebrate things. So yes, she was giving us homework, but there was also that piece of celebration that was built in each visit. So when it came back, there was something that was measurable, and sometimes our kids grew and sometimes they didn't, and that's okay. We learned from it. But because it was small, chunkable bites, it was easier, even though it was a lot of heavy lifting, it was easier to digest. And then we would talk about it, and there was always a celebration part. Even if the celebration was, okay, well, we learned that didn't work out so well. How do we do it differently? So I think that was, just a great piece of the learning as well.
And room for being able to not succeed in specific things, and not feel like you have to be completely right all the time, which is hard to say because math has the one answer, but also math, right? Math has different ways of getting that answer. Okay. So another thing. While there is, for Miss Mona, while there's a great emphasis on education leadership and teacher accountability with effective instruction, there's also the emphasis for the student themselves to have ownership for their daily mathematic learning as well. What did this look like when addressing how to work with diverse students, and then also different levels of learning in Kenwood Elementary School? Did that come up?
It absolutely comes up. When the teachers unpack the standards, they unpack the standards or deconstruct the standards into the learning targets. And so as Jill was saying earlier, when they were first when they had a common assessment, they would give it a grade. So it would have a single score. And so I remember that first year sharing with them a slide, and it just says a student got 7 out of 10. What does that mean? And they're like, it's a C. I'm like, well, what does it mean a student knows? Like, if we're trying to provide feedback to students around what they know and don't know, what does the 7 out of 10 tell them? And they're like, it doesn't really tell you anything. And so then I put up on the screen another slide that had 2 learning targets. And one of the learning targets got a 5 out of 5. And the other learning target got like a 2 out of 5. So I said, so now what does this mean? And they're like, oh, the student actually understands that first learning target. It's a second learning target that they need to work on. I said, so imagine if you're the student receiving that same feedback, what does that do in terms of a student's self-efficacy? Because a C is a C. However, if I see that there's 2 learning targets, but I have got that, I have mastered it. I only need to work on this one more thing. What that does to the student is it builds up their self-efficacy as a mathematician. What happens to students is when they get a score back, even let's say it was a D or an F, they start to tell themselves that they are not a mathematician. So their mathematical identity is not strong. They don't see themselves as a mathematician. So when teacher teams start to provide better feedback to students that is targeted feedback to a learning target or to a standard, they start to see that, oh, that's something I can do. I can do this. And so that self-talk is really important for students. And so I remember the teams kind of embracing that and they started to create some student self-assessments and giving kids feedback by target. And I'm pretty sure they're like more standards based now as a district, or at least at the elementary schools. And so they saw the power in providing stronger feedback. And the students then could take that feedback and say, I noticed this a lot. The kids would be like, okay, so instead of just giving a C or a D, whatever the letter grade was, or a 70%, 60%, they'd say, okay, these are the 3 things I know I have. This is the one thing I still need to improve upon. So instead of a student coming into a classroom going, well, I don't know how to do this, they walk into the classroom going, this is what I still need to learn. And it just changes that perspective for the student. One of my favorite quotes from Roland Barthes, he talks about a learning enriched school and a learning impoverished school. A learning impoverished school is where you expect a lot of student learning and you don't expect adult learning. A learning enriched school is where you see the learning of both the teachers and the students go hand in hand. And what I saw through the use of the student self-assessments, through the teams coming together, creating these common assessments, looking at data and changing their instructional practices, what Kenwood was experiencing was what this learning enriched school, where they were seeing the learning of the students and the learning of the adults go hand in hand. And so you cannot just focus on adult learning. You have to focus on student learning and building up that mathematical identity for students so that they see themselves as mathematicians. I mean, we have adults in this country and beyond that say they're not a math person. And that's because their experiences in mathematics were not as powerful as what the students at Kenwood are experiencing now. And so they see themselves in the content, they see themselves, their cultures are accepted into the building. They see that in the content that they're doing. And it's very powerful.
I agree. I raised my hand when you said I was a math person. I consider myself a creative person, but I also really loved finite. It just didn't love me back. But I agree with you. If there's a huge focus, not a huge focus, but if we do start that narrative with students, especially at younger ages, that you are a mathematician. And I love that. I hadn't heard it before, but to have an identity, to identify yourself as a mathematician, how much more impact would that be on their growth, on their cognitive growth, obviously at being excited, at wanting to know more about math. That's so important. And I feel like before I hadn't heard it before in that way. But I would be super sold. If I could do it all over again, I would do better in math.
That's my mom says that too.
Yes,
Because she
because
listens to me talk about it. She's like, if you would have taught me, I would have been fine.
absolutely, yes, I agree. Because it's
I'm sorry. I think that comes to just when Mona was talking about, because let's face it, most of the teachers, we learned there was one right answer. There was one right way and there was one right answer. So having to transform your understanding as a math teacher when you were taught as a student one way to then be the teacher a different way, to focus more on the learning and the understanding versus the right answer. So that example that Mona gave, the 7 out of 10, like that really was a whole shift in thinking as far as not just from a grading perspective, but an understanding of what the teacher should focus on, right? Because if we want to get the kids to not just focus on the right answer, we have to get the teachers to not just focus on getting to the right answer. And that's a huge cognitive shift for elementary teachers, particularly because of the limited coursework that we have. So that, that was just another great benefit that came from that, was that we were learning how to work all the great structures of PLCs, but at the same time, understanding how to really embrace the math content in a way that allowed students to own their learning. And that's a tricky thing, particularly for elementary, because there's a lot of questioning that goes into that, and you don't always know, as teachers, we're kind of control freaks. And so you have to let go a lot of that control and kind of let student learning guide your path versus just, here's the way I'm teaching it. And if they don't get it, oh, well, but really understanding and learning the content deeply enough to guide students, meet them where they are, and then guide them to their next point of proficiency.
Yeah, you want students to not be answer seekers. You want them to be problem solvers.
Yes.
And they have to be curious, and they have to find joy in what they're doing. And so that is a huge piece of the conversations, because if a teacher or a team is focusing solely on teaching one way, what happens when a student thinks divergently? And if we as a team have not thought about all of those anticipated solution pathways, and a student comes across something very unique, I have seen the student being shut down, saying, oh no, I need you to do it the way I did it. Well, that's not going to build problem solving at all. So in mathematics, a huge emphasis is that we have to make sure we're developing problem solving, not just, can I find the answer?
Well, and that involves so much conversation. I just think from a leader perspective, like I always had a math workshop approach to teaching when I was a teacher. So there was lots of conversation and partner work and facilitating of instruction, but not all leaders have that experience. And I know that, in buildings I've been in, or even, my predecessor here, a good classroom was a quiet, compliant classroom. And so if that is the mind, if that is the thinking of the leader, then that will, teachers that'll be even more uncomfortable, or some resistance to get that messy work going. And so I think that that's just a think about for leaders, that we have to create the environment that, one, allows teachers to take those risks, knowing that, there's going to be some messy work. We're going to have to fail forward, and getting in there with them, but then also letting them know that it's okay, to walk into the classroom and it looked a little bit like organized chaos, if you will, as long as the kiddos are learning. But I definitely know that for teachers who were here prior to my leadership, that was kind of an uncomfortable shift as well, because it was like, they're talking, they're moving around, and they're not all working on the same thing, or all of that messiness. But gosh, the other side of kids being so empowered is win all day long.
You can see that difference with everything that you've implemented now, from what you had told me before. So in a previous conversation, you did mention that having a consultant is essential. What advice would you give school education leaders that are listening about seeking professional development guidance?
Well, not only would I give it, but I do give it, because I mentor a lot of newer principals as well. And so here's true story. So in our district, like Mona mentioned, it was a 3-year commitment, right? And every day, every minute of those 3 years was necessary. One, because we know change doesn't happen overnight. I think we all try to jump in and do it once or twice, and then we're done. Well, the 13 schools that were involved in the pilot, had different degrees of success, but nevertheless, we were all involved in that in-depth understanding of the process, right? Well, then our district made the decision that everybody needed to understand PLCs. So everybody was sent to the conference, and then, which was a wonderful 3-day conference. but then expected to replicate what it took us 3 years to do. And so that's just not achievable. It's just not. And so I would say that the best part about working with Mona, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, was that as the leader, I'm learning and growing too. And so I'm being given things and guidance to go along the way. And there are accountability pieces. And so, oftentimes as leaders, we try to put accountability measures in place, but things distract us, or, there are outside things that are, taking precedence over this. Well, when your consultant is coming, that's not changing. So you have to, there's a deadline, and we have to stick to those, tight and loose agreements. And so it allows there to be tight agreements that you are part of as the leader. It's not like you're dictating something that needs to be done. It's something that we are in the boat together. So that consultant just kind of gives that outside objective lens, but keeps the eye on the prize, because they don't have other distractions. Their main goal and focus is to get you where you need to be, or where your vision is going. And so that just allows you to stay eye on the prize, as far as I'm concerned.
And then also for you, Ms. Mona, what is your advice if anyone is curious about mathematics at work?
Let me know. No, my advice is, if you're looking at your current reality and your students are not learning at high levels and your teachers are working in isolation, there's something better for you. It's better for your staff. So as a classroom teacher, I taught summer school, and I was an Algebra 1 teacher, and there was 5 algebra teachers, and I could, as the kids sat with me in summer school, I could tell by the students' performance what teacher they had, because there were so many unintentional inequities that us as a team had created because we were not collaborating. So if your core belief is you believe that all students can learn at high levels and you're not there yet, then Mathematics at Work is the framework that you need for your school to support you in that endeavor.
One of the main things of this conversation I take is that mathematics is so important to us being out in the real world. And you said problem solving. That was the main thing. Problem solving. Yes, absolutely. I might not be 100% with finite, but I can problem solve like no other, because you learned it from what you were able to have all these years in grade school. So thank you. I appreciate everything that you do.
I was going to say, the other thing I want to say too is that I want to make sure, because I know that we talked about it, we know our learning with Mona was 10 plus years ago. And I want to say, like, the learning is never done, because we have out at Kenwood, we have re-engaged with Mona.
Right.
It's kind of like, okay, we feel like we've got some really great traction with what you taught us the first time. And so now we're at a level of going deeper with the work. And so we reached back out with Mona saying, okay, here's where we're at. We know that a lot of the learning loss that occurred during the pandemic. And so we're really wanting to work on creating acceleration cycles. And so we reached out to Mona to say, like, okay, here's where we are. So the learning is never done. And that's the other thing I would say, is that, not only does it work, but it works so much that we're back for another go at it. And so that's, if there's, the proof is in the pudding, I would always say, our test scores will show that. But the fact that the staff and Mona, it's so funny. I just, I want to say with Mona, the teachers that weren't here. I remember when Mona first joined us back last summer for our first re-engagement with Solution Tree, after our first encounter with them, people who were like, I remember them saying to her, like, okay, I know I've never met you, but like Mona's like a household name at Kenwood. It was like, well, Mona said. So it was really exciting, and for us, it was so exciting to have her back, because it was kind of like when you have a teacher and then you graduate and you get to come back and say, look at what we've accomplished. And so it was like her coming back to us. We were so prideful to be able to kind of show off, like, look what you taught us and look what we're applying. And now we're ready for more.
That's exactly how I felt as well. I got to see my students grow up a little bit.
Oh, well, that's so rewarding. I love that. I love that you are still, I didn't know that, like, that you continue to re-engage, and absolutely.
I'll be there in a month.
Yes. Oh, I can't wait I will have you back on here. Well, thank you both so much. I appreciate your time. Thank you for sharing your success story with us. And then, Miss Mona, thank you for your insights on mathematics at work and PLC. I really do appreciate everything that we talked about here, and I learned a lot. So thank you for that as well.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you. This was an awesome conversation.
To learn more about their strategies and data on becoming a Model PLC school, navigate to our Solution Tree website, solutiontree.com, and hover over the menu, Our Solutions, click on Mathematics at Work, then Success Stories, and then find Kenwood Elementary School. Also, visit our website to learn more about Mona Toncheff, and if you would like to request her professional development guidance, fill out your request. Now, a sponsor message from the company. At Solution Tree, we do share your vision to transform education to ensure learning for all. And we can help you make this vision a reality. No other professional learning company provides our unique blend of research-based, results-driven services that improve learning outcomes for students. We appreciate you tuning in. Make sure to navigate to our solutiontree.com/podcast page to listen to our other episodes. There you can subscribe to our podcast today via the drop-down button labeled subscribe to your favorite podcast app. Also, remember to like our episodes and subscribe to our YouTube channel. This has been your host, Prisma Lopez Marine. Thank you for listening to our podcast, Charting New Paths in Pre-K through 12 Education.